Okay, we're on part 5, The Lost Machine City. Still stuck in icy, snowy environments, but we're diving straight into Dwemer environments soon enough. Anyway, so here's a puzzle where you have to set up the gear thingies so that they all stay at the top after pulling the lever, and after pulling the lever once or twice, you'll see that there's a pattern, basically of evens and odds, which tells you how to configure the initial state accordingly so that they all stay at the top at the end. So you have to hit these spinny things in order to move them up and down. And down. Then after that, we go for a train ride, which reminds me of the Half-Life train ride, although I personally prefer outside world rides where the player is idling. So I think something like Serpent Canyon in the original Unreal ticks all the right boxes, because here the atmosphere is just too mild, not very abundant. It's, kind of goes by pretty quickly. Although it's presently, mostly in the interior, so that's fine. Anyway, after that, there's an apparatus that's not really a puzzle, but more so just a mechanical curiosity of sorts, where you can move the platforms around to make the other platforms behave in a different way. Although it doesn't matter because the player has multiple options here, and they can either go through that way or they can go take the alternative path and go elsewhere. Then even if they do go forward with a big dark room, they have even more options up ahead. But to me, the big dark room seemed more alluring, so I went that way. Now, the twist here is that it's a little bit more of a sci-fi setting rather than a steampunk kind of perspective for Dwemer levels, which they seem to vary to some degree between the two, but generally it hits more at a particular primitivism in the sense that everything is done with steam and there is certain machinery that is off limits to create. Whereas a handful of dungeons in vanilla Skyrim stray away from that with the heavy use of magic and such. So that's all well and good, but things like Elder Scrolls Online take that idea and run away with it, resulting in the absurd, as far as I'm concerned at least. Like, there are mechanically powered thinking robots in the DLC for ESO where Sotha Sil is involved, and it's that tiny little place you get teleported to, and it's this whole thing. It's kind of like a Dwemer city, which I forgot the name of, but it's the one with all the Dwemer steampunk kind of stuff. Same thing with magic, just in general. I think fantasy universes with magic need to be careful with how they treat it. The stories where magic is kind of mysterious, hard to use, uncontrollable, etc., are better crafted the universes in which that's the case are better crafted because it's easier to explain away how magic is used, how magic applies to the world. Whereas if everyone can use magic and it's just this supernatural little toy of a phenomenological feature, then the universe gets pretty stupid pretty quickly. Oh, the hero's sidekick is going to die because of this attack? Well, why doesn't he just use teleportation magic and just leave? Or, why doesn't someone just resurrect him with their stupid little wand or whatever? Oh, you're traveling with horses? Why? Just use teleportation. Like, like ESO particularly is so insane with this. And I'm not talking about, there's fast travel and it's not really immersive, but cases in which like this, there's cutscenes and stories playing out, and like just someone teleports out of a random hole. It's like, okay, what? Um, that's what I'm talking about. Oh, there's a bad guy, and you know, there's a bad guy in the story. Period. Just use the spell. Just use the spell that does all the things. The end. And ESO abuses this pretty thoroughly. Although that's just scratching the surface of the bad writing in ESO. But that's just my 2 cents. I'm still waiting for the writers to admit that ESO is just an alternative universe where there was a dragon break and none of that is technically canon. There's also, that reminds me of, I went back to WoW in like 2015 or something, whenever Mists of Pandaria came out, to try a little bit. And I did a quest where, on the Horde side, where there was a Tauren Paladin, and I think it was in some jungle place that I don't remember the name of. But the quest was like, his pregnant wife was sick. And you had to go out, the quest was to get herbs or something to cure her, and you did, but then it was too late or something. And then at the end, there's a cutscene where he's a paladin, and he tries to heal her, and it's like, dude, just use resurrection magic. And she dies. It's like, what? There's resurrection magic. What? How, like, this doesn't compute. And you have to twist yourself into a pretzel, figuratively, to explain away how that even works. It's like, no, that when you involve magic like that, it's catastrophic for the credibility of the universe in terms of world building. And I think that's true of like trying to merge a fantasy world but including elements of sci-fi that I think you can do that only to a certain degree. Like putting robots in there, I think it's kind of silly. If they're like fully autonomous, responsive robots that have some sense of reason, same concept. Although with magic, I think it's pretty extreme. Now here's an obvious reference to Half-Life. I think everyone who has played Half-Life remembers the annoying fan in Chapter 5, I think it was, where you basically go around the test chamber, activating the fuel pumps and the electricity and such to kill off the tentacles. And in fact, I'm pretty sure the chapter was called Blast Test. Now, after that, there's a water tunnel where there's a couple more options, and I took the first one. That reminds me, though, of an interesting curiosity, which is, this is kind of like totally unrelated, but slightly related, so I'm going to go down this rabbit hole of if a certain robotic task, let's say, contains instructions that collectively yield an instruction set that is Turing complete, then you must be able to build general computers with that. So the idea is like if although this is, kind of stretching it, but the idea is like, look, if there's a robot in a certain universe, like, and there's nothing else, it's like, that doesn't make sense, because you should be able to build computers if that robot has a certain procedure that has all the instructions available to make it to make a Turing complete language. Anyway, but this is just reminiscent of an idea that's been used, for example, in the infosec community. Uh, I don't know how popular this is, but in the infosec community, there was talk at least about the exploitation of individual instructions, and I mean at the ISA level of a computer. Uh, and there was a number of papers about this as well. And in one of the papers I vaguely remember, they called them gadgets, and I'll explain. So if you're able to isolate and execute certain instructions of a particular procedure and ignore the rest, then you can take those instructions as a collection and yield a sort of de facto Turing complete instruction subset architecture, so that basically you as a hacker can create hidden programs within hardware or software to create whatever you want that fits in the hardware memory, and possibly even take control of the computer itself. So the idea is like, if you're able to turn like the target instructions, the instructions around the target instructions into no ops, and then take these, and they call them gadgets, and use these gadgets basically in whatever way you want, then you have basically, you can create hidden programs from a black box perspective. I too bad I don't remember the name of the paper. It could not have been smashing the stack for fun and profit. And I'm sure it's relevant to some degree with uh, embedded programming right now, but I don't know to what degree. And I know the days of putting NOP slides into program and uh, injecting your program using NOP slides in order to get kernel access or whatever. I think those days are maybe over, but I'm not sure. Anyway, just I know that was like, I don't even know how we got on that tangent, but that was just a curiosity I thought of. But point being, putting certain things in world building should still follow the rules if it wants to be believable, at least, which makes it more valuable, makes it more immersive, I think. And I think I can just go over this whole place as a collective environment, although there's some variation in the ones that are purely like custom made. Although I think I scantily remember that I mentioned it. Anyway, I'll go over it. So the biggest thing that stands out is the overall emphasis on height and the depth of the entire level, which, if you go through the fan area in particular, it gives you a sense of how deep, how big the Dwemer construct is. Although I want to see more mechanical dynamism in general, just across the board. Not even just in Skyrim, but in games in general, single player games. The fan part and the dark room definitely come alive far more than most levels in Skyrim, but there's a lot of potential here for moving levels and stuff, although it's very difficult to do that in a way that looks cool and actually works well, and so on and so forth. Just in general, even with good engines with good physics, not like Creation Engine, it's just a pain to set up highly mechanical levels that are not just illusions, optical illusions, or so on and so forth, or just visuals that like move around but you can't interact with them. Like I can't even think of a level that is like something where the level like changes parts and moves around like some kind of mechanical level. I don't think I've ever been in one for, because it's a cool concept, but it's just a pain in the ass to make something like that. Anyway, so the energy plant part right out of the tunnel is architecturally distinct and takes a very interesting base shape where height is still emphasized, but things become very narrow, and uh, you can kind of have this multi-hallway feel, even though it's really one large shape with two floating support structures. And it becomes highly integrated because there's multiple parts that connect to each other at various points in a pretty seamless way. And now the auditory atmosphere is once again mild, and I think some strong ambient sounds would have helped, but the lighting has a personality to it that gives off some visual moods mixed in with the environmental characteristics, such as the use of strong warm colors to emphasize features to stand out among textures with cold tones and cold lighting. But this is really only found in the levels where the architecture is custom and grafted to the original Dwemer architecture. Whereas a lot of the levels with vanilla Dwemer assets take a more traditional route of having surroundings that don't particularly stand. But one thing that's interesting is that there's an emphasis on the conceptual environment, like in the giant fan room, because it doesn't have much detail. Overall, it has like large details to sculpt out the shape, but it's not especially sophisticated, and yet it still feels like you're somewhere with personality, somewhere interesting, because the concept itself is brought to life. So there are definitely environments where you can slack off on fine detail and still make an impact. And that brings us to the next part, which performs the very same thing. We get this massive presentation in front of us on the outside that we had a glimpse of from across the icy cleft. I actually think the silence and the occasional interruption of cracks of lightning and earthquakes works strangely well here. To me, it makes this place have a sense of mysterious danger to it. Now, here's another puzzle where we have 2 degrees of freedom. You have 2 buttons a bit spread from each other, so really you have an ordering. You can press one first and the other, or vice versa. And just observing what happens when you press each one might give you a hint that there's some interaction between the two things. So if you press one, then press the other fast enough, one apparatus interrupts the other, and voila. Because time is pretty much the only thing you can slightly vary there. Also, we're getting into more of like a fine detailing based architecture here in the control center, but we also have these nested structures, which I like seeing in general because I think it's pretty cool. Like putting structures that could also exist alone in the outside world within larger structures that are interior and seamlessly grafting them together. Now, depending on what you did before the choices the player makes, here you either take the index and go to the outside of the tower and go into the center, or you have to go somewhere else first. And we're coming up to the next boss after this.
There it is. I can't believe I'm seeing it with my own eyes.
So this is the index. Fascinating. Scholars say it can become a weapon when wielded by proper hands.
We need you to deactivate the generator in the back room. That'll disable this force field. We'll stay here and make sure the safety mechanisms aren't activated.
Sorry, Dragonborn. We can't let you take the index. I suppose there's no hiding it now. The Stendar nonsense. It was just a cover. Relax. I don't wish to harm you, but you're in our way. This artifact is better off in the hands of our group. I wish I could make you understand. These artifacts are just as dangerous. Anyway, I'm not here to debate you. Goodbye, Dragonborn. Hello. Bye for now.
Normally, I would chastise you for trapping yourself, but I am sure the wait was atonement enough. The blame is left squarely on your shoulders for trusting her. Or was it the lizard who brought her along? Now, we have a more pressing matter to attend to. If the index is stolen, we have to find a different way to activate the tower. Let me think. Never mind about this being your atonement. In the West Wing, there is a way to force energy into the tower. Turn it on, and meet us at the bridge. We need to enter the transporter before it shuts down. Hold on, that does not sound right. Did you activate the transporter or the weapon?
You said to press the blue button. There were two of them, so I pressed both.
What? You activated the weapon?
Gods, you told me what to do.
There is only one blue button, you colorblind reptile brain.
Hang on, I'm absolutely not colorblind. Do you want...
Enough. I will handle this myself. One more thing. If the control center activates before I return, there are two outlets on either side of this room. You need to place energy cores in each of them. Luckily for you, they are the same color.
You don't think I'm colorblind, do you?
So this is one of the harder bosses. I think this is hard too. Let's talk about it. There are two attacks. First is it shoots fireballs, which do more damage than the regular fireball. And the second is the whirlwind attack, where the closer you are to him, the more damage you take. So you have to stay away from the center in those cases. It's a pretty constant dot within an AoE. So the level is structured in such a way that you can LOS the fireballs most of the time. There are also a few mechanics here. Number one is the adds that constantly spawn, which every so often drop energy orbs that you have to place on each one of the two slots that are in the arena. And until then, the fight will just loop in phase 1. Then after that, it goes to phase 2, where the boss switches to melee and the guns hover off on either side. And pretty much they'll just constantly shoot at you at that point until you drop down to the bottom that opens up. Which, by the way, a little bit more mechanical dynamism there. Once you're at the bottom, there's two ways to destroy the boss. The first one is just to keep attacking him pretty much. To actually attack the boss instead of attacking the ads this time. Because the boss is vulnerable in phase 2, not in phase 1. Preferably with ranged spells, by the way, because the melee has a pretty large AoE that does serious damage. And then option 2 is to lure the boss into hitting one of the generators. And then when he's glowing, the generators are like those things that have the red or blue sparks. Then he'll glow that color. And then when he's glowing, you have to lure him again to the power cell things that match the color and have him hit that. And if you do that twice, he also dies. But obviously, the easier way is just to keep hitting him with the spells until he's down. Now the main thing is that the ads do decent damage, plus the various mechanics and attacks, which make this one of the harder bosses. But overall, I think still doable as long as you pay attention to it.
The transporter should take us